Good evening and welcome. You're watching Left, Right and Center. I'm Padmaja Joshi, and the big story coming out of United States, but something that is going to affect the entire world, at least all of those countries whom Donald Trump has so far threatened and in fact imposed tariffs on. A major blow to the US president. The US Supreme Court today struck down his sweeping tariffs which were imposed across the globe. This basically means that as far as India is concerned, Washington's 18% remaining tariff that continue on India are now technically illegal. This was a 6-3 ruling that came from the Supreme Court of the United States, and the SC said that President Trump violated federal law when he unilaterally imposed these sweeping tariffs. The apex court did not say what should happen though to the more than $130 billion in tariffs that the US president has already collected. Will they be refunded? What are the options available in front of those countries? How far is America now going to move to reimpose those tariffs? And that's the other big breaking news that we are getting to you, that Donald Trump has reportedly said that they are going to move very soon in order to reimpose these tariffs. What are the instruments available to him? We'll talk about that in just a while, but make no mistake, this is a big setback, even if it could be temporary. The White House is likely to use alternative laws to reimpose tariffs. This is an issue that has been central. It's been right front and center to the US president's foreign policy and economic agenda. In fact, yesterday, while anticipating what could happen in the Supreme Court, he said that these tariffs have been an intrinsic part of his economic policy, that the country would have suffered if he wouldn't have tariffed countries across the globe in the manner that he did. Joining us now on the broadcast will be a panel of experts, but I want to bring in NDTV's Aditya Rajkaul and Gauri Dwivedi first. Aditya, first tell our viewers, what are the options available in front of the US president in order to reimpose these tariffs? Because as far as that is concerned, he seems quite clear. He won't take it as a setback. He'll come right back.
Well, Padmaja, as you rightly pointed out, this is a big setback to the Trump administration because this was the biggest policy that created ripples all across the globe. India had 50% tariffs, that was reduced to 18% very recently. You asked me about what are the likely outcomes of this. Of course, there's a huge billions and billions of dollars that will have to be returned. Will it happen? Unlikely so. What are the provisions that Trump has? He has said today, apparently US media is quoting and said that he said that this is a disgrace, and he has also said that he has a backup plan. It's likely Trump was actually anticipating this to happen and has a backup plan. Now, what is this backup plan? There is the national security provision, the section 232 and section 302 under the US law that can be actually raised in this case, and under the national security provision, the global tariffs policy could be reintroduced. That is the big development coming at this hour. We'll wait what the White House press secretary or Donald Trump himself says in media. It's likely that within the next 2 hours, there could be possibly a statement from the Trump administration. But as of now, if we speak about India, I don't think that the Indian government will react to it. They will just observe this both from DC and Delhi. They will let the diplomacy do the talking. That means that the backdoor diplomacy from the Commerce Ministry side and the MEA side that is happening will likely continue till March. But the next few days are very interesting. As you rightly pointed out, Padmaja, this might be temporary. The global tariffs policy could be reintroduced. But nonetheless, this is a big, major domestic setback for Donald Trump.
And in fact, that's the reason why he will take all pains to ensure that the image of a setback doesn't stick to him. He'll be hyper aggressive now. In fact, just in the lead up to the Supreme Court's ruling today, he had said without tariffs, this country would be in such trouble right now. Without tariffs, this country would be like your company was 2 years ago. What a difference it made. And you know who brought the cases against us? People that are China oriented, people that have business in China, that want to rip us off and keep ripping us off. So Donald Trump, they're trying to say that this was in essence, it was something that was very beneficial. It was needed, Gauri, for America. It has given a huge boost to his country, and that is the front foot that he will try and keep, projecting even over the next few hours as he contemplates what his options are.
As Patuja, Aditya was right in pointing out that there are a couple of options that the president has there. He would like to, of course, continue the aggressive posturing, and that's really the essentially the hallmark of his entire economic plan. How he went about saying that U.S. has been shortchanged for decades at end, and its manufacturing has been deeply shortchanged, and now it's going to reverse that trend through these tariffs. Now, but what this rare verdict has actually done is a check on the executive powers of the administration, and I think that's the big single far-reaching implication of this verdict, that the executive powers of the administration will be checked, and the fact that 2 out of those 6 appointees in the Supreme Court were actually Donald Trump appointees indicates the sense that there is now within the legal community in the US, there is a clear sense that when it comes to the legal veracity of the argument with regard to tariffs, it doesn't hold any ground. So whether he invokes those national security clauses, whether he goes all the way to the Congress, or whether he pulls out some set of measures remains to be seen. But as far as the legality of these tariffs are concerned, that has now been very clearly stated by the US Supreme Court, with 2 of his own appointees actually not siding with that argument. What it also does indicate is that there is now a huge question mark of some of the big bang trade agreements that are there, and also in terms of some of the big trade relationships that the US has. Remember, there's also a very big trade relationship the US has with China. There is an upcoming China visit for Donald Trump. US and China have not sealed a trade pact. All those are questions that are likely to dominate discussions both in Capitol Hill as well as in Oval Office over the next couple of days and weeks.
Absolutely. Gauri and Aditya, just stay on with me because we have a whole panel of big names joining us now. Milind Deora, Rajya Sabha MP of the Shiv Sena, joins us, Senior Associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Raymond Vickery is here with us, and Robert Moran, political strategist and partner at the Brunswick Group, is with us. I want to ask you first, Mr. Deora, for India, very, very significant, particularly because our team is set to be in the United States just in 2 days from now.
Yeah, well, firstly, the news has just come in that the US Supreme Court has essentially struck down the administration's imposition of tariffs under what's called the IEEPA, which I believe is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Does that mean tariffs are illegal in the United States? No. Does that mean that the US president and the executive would have to go to the US Congress, to both houses, to get essentially their buy-in for these tariffs? Possibly not. From what I understand, there are several other options that the US government has. For instance, if they can demonstrate that certain tariffs are imposed because goods are being dumped in the United States, that has nothing to do perhaps with the Supreme Court verdict, from what I understand. If they say there's a tariff imposed because there's a national security issue on a particular good that's being imported into the US, then that would perhaps not come under be relevant to the Supreme Court verdict. So, is it relevant for India? Yes, it is. Should India be celebrating or should India be worried? I don't think we should do either of those things. I think we are now in a situation where we're dealing with the United States, administration to administration, government to government, commerce department to commerce department. And regardless of what happens in the United States, it's for the government and the government to thrash out the contours of a deal. So I don't think it's right for me as a politician to comment on what's going to happen in the United States. How will this play out politically? But I do believe that in India, there may be an opportunity for us to look at working with exporters and exploring that if indeed the Supreme Court verdict, which once we have all the details, if, for instance, there's a mechanism by which the importer, the US importer, has the ability to process a refund claim if the tariff has been imposed as per the IEEPA, then of course the government of India should work with exporters in India to coordinate with the US government, with their counterparts in the US, to ensure that those funds are, those refunds are claimed and processed. But beyond that, as I said, I don't think that India should be reacting in any way, positively or negatively. I think we should see what happens in the United States. Will the administration look at other options? And as I said, the best option and avenue for us is ultimately to talk government to government.
Absolutely, and caution is key, which is why so far we haven't seen any official reaction come in. But the amount that you're talking about, almost $487.3 million, that's how much India has already given in terms of the tariff so far.
Yeah, well, again, these are things. So I'm not sure under, if all these tariffs were imposed under IEEPA, maybe they were imposed under some other sections as well.
Yeah.
And does this warrant a refund claim? These are things which we have to wait and see. So once that becomes clear based on the Supreme Court verdict, you know how these verdicts are. I mean, you can't just react to a verdict on day one. The headline news is certainly that these tariffs have been struck down if imposed under IEEPA. But what does this mean for India? What does this mean for Indian exporters? What does this mean for US importers who've been importing Indian manufactured goods? This remains to be seen. But I certainly would urge the government of India to monitor this very carefully, to examine the verdict very carefully, to explore options, including refund claims. But as I said, that ultimately we are going to have to negotiate a deal with the United States from government to government. And there's no substitute to that, and there's no way of circumventing that process.
A few political reactions that have already started coming in. One of them I was reading, a senior Congress leader said that, why did we agree to a framework to a trade deal when we knew that the Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS, was going to rule on this very critical issue, and in all likelihood it would go against Donald Trump. What do you say to that?
I'm not sure who the genius congressman is who knew that it would go against Donald Trump, and who knows what the Supreme Court verdict of the United States is going to be. So these are, again, this is just conjecture. This is very easy. Hindsight is, it's easy to predict, say that I could have done this and could have done that. But as I said, that I think this government, the government of India, is dealing with the situation of tariffs in a very matured way, in a very consistent way, and in a way that speaks from India's point of view and what are India's strengths. When the administration imposed a 25% tariff and a 25% penalty, we didn't budge. We still stood our ground, and we will continue to do that. So what happens in the United States, what will happen after this, nobody really knows, and certainly not the Congress party in India. Will the US administration explore other options? Will they go to the Congress? How will this affect the trade deal? This is something which only the Commerce Ministry in the government of India can really answer. But my limited point, if I was a part of the executive right now, if I was a minister in the government of India, what I would do is I would examine this verdict. I would examine if there is an opportunity for Indian exporters to get a refund. And I would obviously keep my eye on the ball. I would look at what the United States plans to do next. And I would continue to have a close, a close and warm dialogue based on mutual trust with my counterparts in the United States, because that's the only way to resolve this issue.
Absolutely, and no apparent jubilation, because you certainly don't want to poke the bear when it comes to Donald Trump. Milind Deora, thanks very much for joining us here. Let me take that question to Raymond Vickery as well. Is there any option, like we were discussing, for not just Indian exporters, but around the globe, people to start talking about refunds? Is that even a possibility at this point?
Well, thanks very much for having me and allowing me to comment on this. These tariffs are not paid by the foreign exporter. These tariffs are paid by the U.S. importer. Now, so they are the ones who are going to get the money back. Now, it then will go as to what the deal was, the contract between the foreign exporter, the Indian exporter, and the U.S. importer, as to whether any of that will be passed to law. And that's a matter of private contract law. But, the whole falsehood upon which President Trump has based these tariffs all along is that the foreign exporter paid the tariff. Well, that's not true. This tariff, the tariff is levied on the U.S. importer. Now, there can be private concerns whether or not that's passed along to the consumer, or whether part of it's absorbed by the supplier, or whether or not the importer absorbs it all. So that is the situation. The thing which is most important here is to recognize, and I see on your screen President Trump holding up what he held up on April the 2nd about the so-called reciprocal tariffs. That is gone. That has no legal basis at this time. Now, and so that's the 25%, which was originally put upon Indian imports. The rest of it, the other 25% on Russian oil, is not dealt with in this decision. And indeed, President Trump is an expert at lawfare, using the courts really to wage domestic or warfare, if you will. He's not going to change. He's going to try to double down. He's going to say Section 232 is going to allow him to do the same thing in another way. But that may be a good talking point in the short term, but it's not going to carry the day. The good news here is that the American system is holding, that the judicial branch, part of the checks and balances, has been willing to stand up.
Yep.
Will the Congress, the legislative branch, stand up? Well, there are going to be people over there who are going to be more encouraged, who've just kept their heads down in the past. And you have midterms coming up. The people who are paying these tariffs have political clout in districts and states all across this nation. They may be Republican, they may be very conservative, but they don't like paying these kinds of tariffs. All of the polls show that. So it's going to have an impact. Now, President Trump is going to say that the judges were wrong, that this is an attack on the United States of America Foundation.
Yeah, and
all of that.
He's already called it a disgrace. But if I can please take that point you made to Robert Moran as well. Do you think that the Congress is also now going to be emboldened to stand up to Donald Trump if and when he does try to reimpose these tariffs?
So to answer your question, I don't think that the current Congress will do much of anything on this. I think a future Congress, maybe after the midterms, if the House flips to Democrats, could and would. But I think in the current system, what you're looking at is a short-term setback for the White House that is a ruling on IEEPA. It is not a ruling on all tariffs. It's a ruling on his authority under IEEPA to declare these tariffs. The White House knew that this was coming. It was obvious from their messaging for months that they knew that this was a likely outcome, which is why you've had other guests talk about this. They're going to then cite powers from a law from 1930, the 1962 law, and the 1974 law. They're going to cite those powers, saying that that those powers from those laws give them the ability to do essentially what they've already done. And that could be litigated as well. But there's going to be a plan B. And I think, your guests and some of the Chiron here has alluded to that. So I think you're going to see their response on their plan B probably today, if not Monday, maybe Tuesday latest. And then they will keep going. I think it's important to note that the Trump administration and MAGA is somewhat different than the traditional Republicans. Traditionally, Republicans between the end of the Civil War and the end of World War II were pro-tariff. But then at the end of World War II, they became anti-tariff and pro-free trade. The Trump ideology essentially has tried to shift the Republican Party back against the free trade orthodoxy that it inhabited for most of the post-war era. And so that's, I think, the complexity here is you have some Republicans that are not really on the Trump train when it comes to tariffs because they're old school, sort of traditional free traders. And I think that's going to be a little bit of a challenge moving forward. But look, I'm sure they have a plan B. There's 3 laws, the 1930 Act, the 1962 Act, the 1974 Act, and there are sections in those laws that will allow them to essentially do roughly what they've already done and claim that they have the power.
But help us
That might
understand
be
how
mitigating.
quickly could this plan B kick in? What are the timelines like for that?
Well, they've known that this is coming for a very long time. So I'm assuming that they will start to cite their presidential authority either today or by Monday.
Okay.
And I'm sure that the president will talk about this in his State of the Union. It's funny because this is one of the
So could
things.
we see this reversed as soon as next week itself?
I would imagine that they will try to very, very quickly argue that they have authority to do the things they've already been doing under different statutes, under different sections of those statutes, because they don't want it. They wouldn't want these to sit and for questions to be asked. They would want to very quickly sort of pivot to the next thing.
Okay.
And I think that's what we're looking at.
Okay, so so help me understand this, Mr. Vikri. You know, if we have the Indian team in the US on Monday, does it in a sense also increase India's bargaining power for the India-US trade deal?
Well, it certainly does. There is no question that in regard to the 18%, it's based upon a law which has been held that he doesn't have the authority to act under. So, sure, India is a sovereign nation, can do whatever it wants in terms of what it decides to do on Monday. But India has been very circumspect, particularly in comparison with other countries, in terms of trying to, one, preserve the important relationship between the United States and India, while not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying, well, we'll just go along with whatever it is that you, President Donald Trump, say it is. So I would expect that India would take a same approach and say, now, wait a minute, let's you tell us what your position is now that your Supreme Court has ruled against you.
Yeah.
And let's work our way through this.
And let's bring in Zorawar Daulat Singh on this as well. And that really should be the key for India now when we are sitting across the table come Monday for this deal that's supposed to be signed in March, operationalized in April, where we say, look, so far you are threatening us with tariffs, but your own Supreme Court has essentially held them illegal. Does that put us in a position of power in this negotiation?
Absolutely. I mean, it's completely changed the entire geoeconomic context, right? So I think let's look at the real reasons why this has happened. The US economy, contrary to all the hype, has not actually benefited from this massive trade sort of, aggression against the entire world. You look at the GDP data, it's not as expected. Industrial jobs have actually declined across 4 to 5 major sectors in the last 8-9 months. So on the whole, the US major corporations are suffering. They realize that this reindustrialization sort of hype is a much more longer, decades-long journey. They don't want to get squeezed and smashed up in the process. So I think for India, we were getting a bit trigger happy and probably made our move a little too soon. But luckily, this is a framework agreement. And a lot of other stuff, including the family silver, was thrown in, by the way. We made these ambitious purchase commitments. You want to call it intent for $500 billion of high-value industrial goods. I think that now is going to be sort of dealt with on a merit basis, right? You need certain aircraft. Yes, you will buy them. But this idea that there was a gun to your head, and frankly, can I also say this idea that your geopolitical relationships with other major powers is going to be a part of this trade understanding and coercion with the United States. I think that's something where India now can sort of, it's got a second chance.
It's got a little bit of wiggle room chance
to revise its position and go after what needs to be done. Yes, the economic relationship with the United States has to grow, but it has to grow in terms where you also going to benefit through your own domestic economy, not just as an importer.
Okay.
But I think as far as the crude oil issue is concerned, I think India must now, and frankly, the position taken by the Indian government was very sensibly that national interests, energy security will be the foremost template. And I think so in that sense, you have the flexibility now on all fronts to work out a win-win arrangement.
All
Because
right.
it wasn't win-win. Let's
All
be
right, so
honest.
thanks
There
to
was
SCOTUS,
one party was winning, one side was bending. Now you have a chance to do that.
thanks to the Supreme Court of the United States, at least for tonight, there is going to be a sigh of relief being breathed all across the globe. How long that lasts, we'll be keeping a close eye. For the time being, though, thank you very much, all gentlemen, Gauri Dwivedi, for having joined us on this big breaking news on Left, Right and Centre. Time for a quick.